Hello, people. I'm Jaby KOAY, joined by ACHARA KIRK.
What's up?
We are talking about Rocketry. Now, full disclosure, we watched the Hindi version. If we decide to do a watch-along of this movie, it'll be in a different language, like Tamil or Telugu or English, whatever's available. So this is starring Madhavan, Simran, Raju Kapoor, as well as a whole host of other actors, talented individuals that helped to tell this story and facilitate bringing it to life. It was directed by R. Madhavan himself, who also wrote it, as well as Anant Madhavan, additional story, and Sridevi Krishna, an additional story. This movie, as you might have heard from the interview that we did with R. Madhavan, was a huge undertaking. So one thing I want to say before we go into our thoughts about this movie is I want to be completely transparent with you guys. I am very well aware of the fact that R. Madhavan might see this video, and that does make me a little bit self-conscious about how I express my opinion. And so I'm going to do this like I do any other video, which is we're going to serve you our feelings and opinions like we are talking to a friend, you know, and the way you do that is respectfully. Not that like we hated the movie or something. If I have any criticisms, I'm going to do it in a nice and respectful way, as if I was talking to a friend about his or her project. Like I said a moment ago, I think what R. Madhavan did here was quite the undertaking. It was a monumental effort.
Yes.
That is crazy to consider. Like the fact that he wrote it, starred in it, directed it, produced basically. It's a lot of hats to be wearing. Mm-hmm. And he did this in multiple languages, no less. That's insane. I have written and directed and acted in short films, and that's about the extent of my experience in that area with wearing multiple hats, and of course edit it and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So, you're taking it from start to finish in a lot of facets. But to do that in multiple languages on top of that, I can only imagine how complex that was, with the pressures of colleagues that are very, very famous, like SRK or Surya and what have you, and other actors in the film. In addition to that, the world is going to see it. So there's a lot of pressure there, and I commend R. Madhavan for doing this undertaking.
Well, and not only that, but the story spans a huge amount of time, and a lot of things happen.
And the guy's still alive.
Yeah, it's like a massive scope for a story for a film. So, it was a huge undertaking.
I want to get one thing out of the way real quick. This story does have the issue that I have with a lot of Indian films, which is a lot of the white actors are not the best. There was this part of me going, well, maybe it's me. Maybe there's an issue with Jaby and his perception of it, but then there was a moment where the French guy face-palmed himself, and I was like, yeah, this is overacting. It's a little bit too much.
Yeah,
but the Indian actors were great.
Yes, and I think not all of the foreign talent were bad. It was just like some of them were not great, and
they stood out the most as like a pink stain on a white sheet, or a white dress. I didn't want to notice that. It's just like it jumped out at me as like, okay, like I'm kind of getting immersed in this world and the behavior, the dialogue and whatnot, and what's going on in the story, and then that thing kind of jumps out at me as like, oh, it's a little cringe,
Yeah, a little, but there were some good actors. The French lady was cool.
She was not bad.
Yeah, and then,
I wouldn't say she was great. I would say she wasn't bad.
And then the two British actors I thought were good.
Which ones?
The colonel.
Oh yes, you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The Scottish guy.
Yeah,
I thought him and his wife were great. Ron Donachi and Phyllis Logan.
Yes.
I personally am a huge fan of stories like this in general. You're talking about a lot of things. First off, you're talking about an underdog who has wild ideas, way outside the box, that are not the norm, and naturally people around him are like, what are you doing? Like, that's crazy. And he has to forge ahead with what he believes in, and hopefully comes out the other side as unscathed as possible, as successful as possible, with his reputation intact, and it's like, that's a very, very huge undertaking in an area that is largely underfunded, in a lot of parts of the world, including India. Hopefully that's all changing now, especially with movies like this and whatnot, and the ambitions of India and its government. But at the time, it was largely underfunded, and the movie has no qualms about mentioning that. Like, compared to NASA's budget, it was insanely small, and like NAMBI was offered so much money to go to NASA, and he's like, no, I'm gonna stay faithful to my community, to my country, and be patriotic and bring this to India instead of giving it to another country, which, as the film illustrates, is like this ongoing effect that happens a lot where India's smartest people are being siphoned.
Yeah.
And I think that it's great to have a film that is talking about this message, that is dedicated to NAMBI and showing everything he went through as honestly as possible, showing that to the world, basically. Like an Indian hero in the truest sense, who persevered through a lot of crazy struggles and whatnot. Like, I was so happy to learn this story. It was really uplifting to see everything he went through and like how he came out the other side and whatnot. For me, he's an unsung hero just because I didn't know who he was.
Yeah. And I wonder if a lot of people in India didn't actually know who he was, you know? And in our interview with Madhavan, like, he was absolutely right. Like, a lot of stuff that happened in his early life was kind of fantastical, you know? And I really loved the way his character was portrayed as this guy who was really resourceful and smart and was willing to do anything and everything in order to achieve his goals and ask for outlandish requests, which most people would be too scared to ask. And he's so gutsy to do all of those things and to smartly infiltrate places where, you know,
it's like a James Bond mission.
It did. At one point, it felt like a spy movie. And it was really cool. And then to have all of that and then to see what happens to him at the end and the accusations that are made against him.
The torture he went through.
And his whole family went through was so frustrating to watch. Because he's a guy who did so much and was so patriotic, and yet he was treated really badly. And so I felt really frustrated for him as I was watching the film.
Off of what you're saying, I have a commentary about that, which is I wish his wife was more present in the first half of the film because she's so important in the latter half. And it's not until she becomes a consequence in his life that she starts to show up more. And I think that's a bad setup. I think that they needed to set her up even more and show the relationship, the dynamic between them even more. Even like it being this thing where she's faithful to him and staying by his side, even though he's constantly off somewhere else doing his thing. And it kind of is a strain on their relationship because like later on, he's full of sorrow towards her. He's apologetic towards her because she's had his back this whole time and he hasn't been there enough for her, etc., etc. In order for that to really pay off, we needed to see more of a setup to that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and not only that, I really enjoyed, I think it's Simran's performance.
Yeah, she was great.
She was so good. And I loved her interactions with Madhavan, that I felt kind of sad that we didn't get to see more of her because she was such a delight to watch, and her acting was so strong in this movie.
Shah Rukh Khan is in the Hindi version of the movie, and I was shocked at how much he was in this film. It was quite surprising because the trailer would have you believe that he was in a scene, that he was in one setup, one location, and that's it. But that scene is actually quite significant to the film as a whole, and he basically co-stars in this movie, and it was quite neat to see him and Madhavan acting opposite of each other in this dialogue throughout the film. I thought that was some of my favorite moments in the movie was just them talking to each other. And so talking about acting some more, Madhavan's acting. And, you know, Madhavan, I'm keeping in mind, he was wearing a lot of hats making this film. He is a dope actor, but I feel like the challenge of doing all these things did wear on him to a certain degree. You know, it's tough to direct yourself. It's a tall order, especially if it's like one of your first times doing it. I don't know how many films he's directed with himself in it, but I would imagine this is a unique undertaking for him. And there were moments where his acting shined. And there were other moments where I was like, oh, I could feel like he's wearing a lot of hats. You know, I wish that all the stress of making the movie was just fueling the acting for the character. I felt like there were instances where it wasn't quite as great as other moments in the film, as I've seen him in the past in other movies. At the same time, it was neat to see him go through this transition, this transformation through different stages of Nambi's life. And I thought he did a great job of embodying the different ages of Nambi. I thought he did a great job in a lot of areas there. It's just like, there were some moments where I was like, oh, okay. I just wish that he had someone else to sort of direct him through that so that he could have, you know, known. It's like, you have what you have at the end of the day. And he's doing like 3 or 4 versions of this.
Yeah.
So
it's a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. And that's what I was going to bring up as well about just the sheer fact that he was able to play this character in so many different ages. And also all of the cast, in fact, I thought aged up really well.
Yeah.
They did a fantastic job with the hair and makeup and prosthetics and whatever that they were doing to make these characters look older, because it all looked believable. It all looked lived in. Certain characters more than others, I guess, because some people just had more of a baby face, which potentially maybe was harder to age up in a super realistic way. But overall, like, it was such a treat to see all of these actors kind of get older as the movie progressed.
I think some of my favorite acting moments from Madhavan came in the latter half of the film between him and his wife. There's a moment on the rooftop when Madhavan is at his most difficult, or Nambi's at his most difficult point in his life before things are resolved, and you can see exactly what he's thinking without much being expressed.
Yeah.
You know, when his kids come to him, I was like, wow, that's some powerful shit. Like, you know exactly what's in his mind because of the difficulty that he's going through. There's this thing in the film that confused me that I don't know if it was a directing choice by Madhavan or an editing choice, but throughout the movie, there was this effect that would happen where it would kind of flash, like it would flash to white and then flash forward to another location, another character, like almost like the way you'd see a flashback in a TV serial, right? It was very dramatic, and the music was very dramatic, and then you'd come back to a very seemingly normal moment, and it felt so out of place, and it was happening from the beginning of the movie. Right from this first scene, I felt like we were seeing that kind of thing happen, and it was like almost kind of a setup or foreshadowing of some kind.
That's what I felt it was. I felt like it was a foreshadowing, letting us know that, something important or something bad is about to happen, because usually that's what happens.
Yeah, I feel like it was trying too hard in that area is the simplest way to describe it for me. I felt like the film would have been better without that stuff.
Sure.
And it might have been more effective emotionally without that stuff. That being said, the moments where I was supposed to feel great for the Indian team, the Indian people in this story, especially when the rocket that they built for the French lasted an absurd amount of time, you know, like a Jewish candle. Like, I thought that was great. Like, I felt happy for them in that moment because they, like, totally took all that data and maximized it to the way that was better than the French.
Yeah.
That was incredible. And the way the scene put a button, which is the guy, he speaks fluent French to one of the French scientists before he exits, and the French scientists are like, wait a second, did he just speak like fluent French to us? And they realize, and they put it all together right then and there. I thought that was a great scene.
Yeah, I mean, that whole storyline was really, really fun. And it just goes to show, you know, the ingenuity of the Indian scientists and of Nambi Narayanan. I'm sorry for the pronunciation.
we have a friend with that name too, and it's tough to say it. Yeah.
Just his whole plan was so smart because everybody underestimated India. And they came along and were like, ha ha ha, we will use that to our advantage and win.
There was this moment in the film where, by the way, there's spoilers. So, like, at this point now, there's spoilers.
Yeah.
So, like, spoilers. So there's a scene in the film where Madhavan, or Nambi is trying to get away with these 3 weapons from Russia. Before I jump into that scene, I thought it was neat to see the perspective of India regarding U.S. and Russia, and U.S.'s attempt to control things, and how Russia was assisting India. That's a wildly different perspective from America and growing up as an American.
Sure, yeah.
And being educated, whether it's our history books or whether it's the news, you know, the media, like I have a very different perspective. And this is why I tell people all the time, you need to look at all facets of the news, not just like Fox News, not just CNBC, but like everything you can, and globally, because you want to get a well-rounded perspective. If you only look at one media source, you're going to be grossly miseducated on what's actually going on in the world. There's a scene where Nambi was trying to take these 3 rockets, or this, you know, the whatever that tech was, onto an airplane. In terms of like the scope of it, in terms of the attitude implied, is that it was like a James Bond secret agent kind of thing. And I just wish that leading into that scene and the way it was handled was a little bit more like Argo. I don't know if you remember the end of Argo, but it was very harrowing, and like your heart is pounding for these characters. Like, are they gonna get away? And I didn't feel any sense of that in that scene. And it may be because we had the present day Nambi talking to Shah Rukh Khan, and so I'm like, I know he gets out of this alive. You know, like maybe that's why I didn't feel it, but like I just wanted it to feel more harrowing, and I didn't quite get that sense for some reason. There was something missing in that scene for me, and I wanted to feel scared for everybody involved.
Well, yeah, because that was the moment where it turned into like a full-on spy action film. I was like, oh, I didn't realize that we were getting this in the movie.
Yeah.
There was so many different aspects of the story. And I mean, what Madhavan said in our interview with him is absolutely true. Like, if all of this stuff is based on real life,
Yeah.
which he says that it is. It's wild that this happened. That is crazy that they had to take whatever they were, snowmobiles or jet skis, and try and get away.
Right. And so knowing what happened is crazy. Pondering it intellectually, that's crazy. But in terms of the way the scene made me feel, I wasn't as immersed in it. That's what I was looking for. And what that told me was that scene was kind of rushed. And perhaps a number of scenes might have been rushed because he's trying to tell a streamlined story of this guy's life.
And it's huge.
And perhaps this might have been better served as a multi-part episode on TV or something like that, or on a streaming platform. But, you know, you have what vehicles you have to tell your stories. Mm-hmm. And the one other thing that bothered me was a scene where you see the real Nambi. I found it to be cool, but also awkward at the same time because I wasn't sure if that was Nambi's voice or if it was our Madhavan dubbing Nambi. And the way it cut between Nambi and SRK was just like, what's it called when something is too real, but it's like,
Valley.
there was something uncanny valley about it. I can't put my finger on it.
I remember talking about it with you after we watched the film.
You said it was like the green screen
I think
stuff.
it was the green screen. It was just like the way the background looked behind their heads, for me anyway, that made it seem a little bit odd. But I actually really enjoyed that scene because the way SRK was talking to the real life Nambi and, you know, offering his apology, it felt so sincere, and I feel like it really was. I feel like this was a moment where we were living vicariously through Shah Rukh Khan as he talks to this man who, you know, he's heard all of the amazing things that he's done for the country, the sacrifice that he's made, and he feels really terrible, as we, the audience, feel about how he has been treated by the government and by his community.
Right.
And he's saying, oh, you know, on behalf of everyone, I'm sorry. And it feels like the audience is also participating in that apology. And I felt it was really strong. It was a really cool moment to have.
I am really glad that you got that out of that scene. The reason why it was difficult for me is because I know that this is based on a true story. I don't know what that real life counterpart looks like. Well, who is SRK portraying in that scene? He refers to himself like he's playing himself.
He's playing himself. I feel like that is a conceit of the movie in order to structure the storytelling in such a way as to be able
That's palatable.
Yeah. To make it interesting for the audience to tell all these different things and then link it back to the present day.
It gives you the Princess Bride effect where you can just skip past boring stuff and move forward as needed. But for me, it's like, all the stuff in the past, I'm like, okay, all that stuff is real, that's real, that's real, that's real. But then the stuff with SRK, I'm like, okay, this is just a tool. This isn't actually what happened, right? Is there an actual interview like this out there that we can find? Is there a real life counterpart to this? Because he's referring to himself. He says, I, SRK, apologize on behalf of India. So then presumably you have a scene with Surya saying the same goddamn thing. And I'm like, okay, so then it's just a little bit awkward for me because I'm like, I was buying into this as a real thing up until this moment because I know that this didn't actually happen. Now, that being said, SRK's acting was phenomenal there. I thought he sold it really, really well.
Yeah.
You said it was the green screen, but there was something in what it was cutting back and forth between SRK and Nambi where I was just like, something is just awkward. I can't quite put my finger on it. It didn't take away from the fact that I really felt for his journey, everything he went through. There was something interesting that you had expressed where Nambi's at the wedding, and this is like at the pinnacle of everyone like just having his back on, having their back turned to him, and just, you know, snooty towards him.
Yeah, he was like an outcast.
Yeah.
People being really mean
like a
to
leper.
him and his family.
Yeah, like he was treated like a leper, you know?
Yeah.
And so, where he's like this diseased person, he's the untouchable, right?
He's a traitor.
He's a traitor.
Yeah.
And then suddenly everyone's phone's ringing, and they're like, oh, you're cool now. And you were so livid about this.
Yeah, no, I was mad. He gets that call from his lawyer or whoever, and they're like, oh, all the charges against you have been dropped.
Yeah.
And then suddenly everyone is cool with him.
Right.
And I'm like, no, not cool.
Right.
You caused his wife to have a mental freaking breakdown.
Right.
She had to go and get psychiatric help.
Right.
You can't just turn around and suddenly be like, oh, we're friendsies now, right? And you owe that man and his family an apology. I was so mad.
What the film gave you, at the very least, was a very strong, convincing portrayal of all of his negative experiences with being called a traitor, the way he was abused by the cops in the police station and whatnot, and he was being interrogated in this gruesome, ugly way. And it's like, this guy is one of the most patriotic Indians of all time, and he's being treated this way in the jail scene. I was just like, I felt so bad for him.
Yeah.
You know, and
he's like, he didn't even know what was going on.
Yeah.
He's like, why am I here? Why are you all treating me badly? And it wasn't just him, but it was his entire family as well.
And so the way our Madhavan was behaving in that scene, it was convincing me that he was going through some shit.
Yeah.
So, you know, good on him there, both acting and directing and editing wise, the way it was all put together. I mean, overall, my experience was positive with the film. I thought that there was a lot to take away from here. And I love this particular topic, and seeing people before were cutting their teeth on this shit in order to give us what we have now in terms of space technology, in terms of all of that stuff, because it matters so much. Like, this convenience is because of space technology, you know? The satellites orbiting the Earth is because of that stuff. And I think we take it for granted. People are like, in real life, are constantly like, why do we have to keep putting money into the space? But like, not just India, but America, wherever.
Yeah.
You know, why do we have to do this? It's like, what's the point? It's like, everything is the point, bitch. This is so important. Like, how do you not... have you seen how hot it's getting? Like, this is really important. Like, this planet's not going to be here forever. We have to travel to other places. It's not just for the convenience of right now. It's not just for this. It's also for our future.
Yeah.
And just discovering more of what's out there and potentially communicating with other intelligent life. Like, this is one of the most important things. And I feel like generations from now, they're going to wonder why we moved so slow at this particular point. That's why I really appreciate these kinds of stories, because my hope is that it inspires the youth, more of the youth, to like venture into this particular area.
Yeah.
You know?
And while I don't think this was a perfect film, I think it's an important film to watch.
Certainly.
Because, you know, of the story that it portrayed and letting us know about this incredible person who did some amazing things.
Yeah, it was great to learn about it. Like, at the very least, I appreciated that quite a bit. So, you guys, thanks so much for hanging out. Hopefully you enjoyed some of this conversation and whatnot. And I would love to know what you guys thought in the comments below. I'm Jaby KOAY. This is
ACHARA KIRK.
Peace out.